We all check the locks before we go to sleep. It makes us feel safe. But locks only work if the danger is on the outside. Tonight, I have 3 terrifying true stories about the moment you realize you are not alone in your own house. From a stranger living in the walls, to a security camera that watches you, and a camping trip where the tent offers no protection at all. Check your closet one last time. Let's begin. Story 1. The Man in the Crawlspace. I have always been a heavy sleeper. My mom used to joke that a marching band could walk through my bedroom and I wouldn't wake up. But after what happened in my first apartment, I don't sleep heavy anymore. In fact, I barely sleep at all. I was 23 years old, fresh out of college, and I had just moved to Chicago for a junior graphic design job. I didn't have much money, so I couldn't afford a nice place in the city center. I found a garden-level apartment, which is a fancy way of saying basement, in an old brick building in the Rogers Park neighborhood. The rent was cheap, mainly because the building was old. The floors creaked, the pipes groaned, and the heat radiators sounded like a dying animal. But it was mine. It had a small living room, a tiny kitchen, a bathroom with a clawfoot tub, and a bedroom at the back of the unit. The bedroom was weird. It had a large walk-in closet that seemed too big for the room. And inside the closet, high up on the back wall, there was a small wooden door. It was painted over with about 20 layers of white landlord paint, sealing it shut. I asked the landlord, Mr. Henderson, about it when I signed the lease. "Oh, that?" He had wheezed, chewing on an unlit cigar. "Just access to the plumbing crawl space. Haven't opened it in 30 years. Don't worry about it." So I didn't. I moved my clothes in, pushed my dresser against the wall under the small door, and started my new life. For the first 2 months, everything was normal. I went to work, came home, watched Netflix, and slept. But around November, when the weather started getting cold, things changed. It started with the food. I'm a creature of habit. I buy the same groceries every week. A carton of milk, a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a 6-pack of soda. One Wednesday morning, I went to make toast, and the bread bag was open. The twist tie was sitting on the counter. I frowned. I always tie the bag. I hate stale bread. I figured I must have been tired the night before and forgot. I tied it up and went to work. 2 days later, it was the milk. I poured a glass, and the carton felt light. I shook it. It was almost empty. I had just bought it on Sunday. I live alone. I don't drink that much milk. Okay, I thought. Maybe I'm sleepwalking? Maybe I'm stress eating in my sleep. I decided to test it. I took a piece of clear Scotch tape and put it on the milk carton lid. If I was sleepwalking, I would break the tape. The next morning, the tape was broken. The milk was empty. I felt a cold shiver go down my neck. Sleepwalking was one thing, but this felt deliberate. I started locking my bedroom door at night. It was a flimsy lock, just a little push button on the handle, but it made me feel safer. Then came the noises. Since I was in the basement, I was used to hearing the upstairs neighbors walking around. Thump, thump, thump. But these noises weren't coming from the ceiling. They were coming from the walls. It was a soft scratching sound, like a rat trying to dig through the drywall. Scritch, scratch, scritch. It always happened around 2 a.m. It seemed to come from the closet in my bedroom. I banged on the wall one night. "Shut up," I yelled, thinking it was a mouse. The scratching stopped instantly. That terrified me more than the noise. A mouse doesn't stop because you yell at it. A mouse doesn't understand English. I called Mr. Henderson the next day. He came over, grumbling, and looked in the closet. He banged on the walls. He checked for mouse droppings. "Nothing here, kid," he said. "Probably pipes expanding. Old buildings make noise. Get some earplugs." He left. I felt like an idiot. I bought a white noise machine and turned it up loud. It drowned out the scratching, and I managed to sleep. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. You know that feeling when you're in the shower and you have to open the curtain because you feel like someone is standing by the sink? I had that feeling 24/7. One night in December, I came home late from a work party. It was snowing, and I was freezing. I unlocked my front door and stepped inside. The apartment was freezing. I checked the radiator. It was off. I checked the window in the living room. It was wide open. Snow was drifting onto my couch. I froze. I knew I had closed that window. I never opened it in December. I pulled my phone out, ready to dial 911. I walked through the apartment, checking every room. The bathroom was empty. The kitchen was empty. I got to my bedroom door. It was closed. I put my ear against the wood. Silence. I slowly turned the handle and pushed it open. The room was empty. The closet door was closed. Calm down, I told myself. Maybe the latch was loose and the wind blew it open. I closed the window, locked it, and cranked up the heat. But I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with a baseball bat, watching the hallway. A week later, I noticed the smell. It was faint at first. A musty, sour smell, like unwashed clothes and old sweat. It was strongest in the bedroom. I washed all my sheets. I sprayed Febreze everywhere. But the smell came back every evening. On Christmas Eve, I was planning to drive home to Ohio to see my parents. I packed my bag and left the apartment around 4 p.m. I got about an hour outside the city when I realized I had left my laptop charger on my bed. I groaned, turned the car around, and drove back. I pulled up to my building around 6 p.m. It was dark out. I walked down the steps to my basement unit. I noticed something odd. The light in my living room was on. I had turned every light off before I left. I am obsessive about checking switches. I stood outside my front door, my heart hammering. I listened. I heard the TV. I heard the theme song of The Office. It was my Netflix account. Someone was in my apartment. I didn't go in. I backed up the stairs quietly and called 911 from the sidewalk. There is someone in my apartment, I whispered to the dispatcher. I can see the lights. I can hear the TV. The police arrived in 5 minutes. 2 officers, big guys, walked down the stairs with their hands on their holsters. They knocked on the door. Police, open up. The TV instantly turned off. Then, silence. The officers banged again. No answer. The landlord, Mr. Henderson, came downstairs with the master key. He opened the door. The officers went in, guns drawn. Police, come out. I waited in the hallway, shaking. After a few minutes, one officer came out. It's clear, he said. Nobody inside. That's impossible, I said. The TV was on. The lights were on. The TV is off now, the officer said. We checked the windows. They are all locked from the inside. There's no back door. If someone was in there, they didn't leave. I went inside with them. The apartment looked normal. But then I saw it. On the coffee table, there was a glass of milk. It was half full. There was a ring of condensation on the table. It was fresh. I didn't pour that, I said, pointing at the glass. The officers looked at each other. They did a more thorough search. They looked under the bed. They looked in the shower. They opened the closet in the bedroom. Nothing, the officers sighed. Look, maybe you left the TV on and forgot? Stress can do weird things. They filed a report and left. Mr. Henderson looked at me like I was crazy and went back upstairs. I was alone. I couldn't stay there. I grabbed my laptop charger and my bag. I was going to drive to Ohio right now, snow or no snow. I walked into the bedroom to grab the charger. It was on the bed. As I reached for it, I heard a sound. Creak. It came from above me. I looked up. The dresser that I had pushed against the back wall of the closet, it had been moved. Just an inch. And the small, painted shut door high on the wall. It was open. It was a black, square hole staring down at me like an eye. And in the darkness of that hole, I saw a face. It was upside down. A man was hanging his head out of the crawlspace, looking directly at me. His hair was long and greasy, hanging down like curtains. His skin was pale gray. But his eyes were wide and bloodshot, and he was smiling. His teeth were yellow and rotten. You forgot your milk, he whispered. His voice was like gravel. It was the voice of a man who hadn't used his vocal cords in a long time. I didn't scream. My throat locked up. I just ran. I sprinted out of the bedroom, out of the apartment, and up the stairs. I ran to my car and peeled out of the parking spot, hitting the curb on my way out. I drove to the police station and ran inside, hysterical. They went back. This time, They brought a K-9 unit. They found him. He wasn't in the crawl space when they got there. He had crawled deeper into the walls. The crawl space wasn't just a plumbing access. It connected to the old coal chute tunnels that ran behind the entire building. He had set up a living space in the gap between my bedroom wall and the building's foundation. The police found a sleeping bag made of old insulation. They found a bucket he used for a bathroom. They found candy wrappers, bread crusts, and empty milk cartons. And they found the peepholes. He had drilled tiny holes through the back of my closet, through the drywall. He had been watching me change. He had been watching me sleep. But the worst part wasn't what he stole. It was what he left. In his little nest, the police found a notebook. It was filled with drawings. Drawings of me. Drawings of me sleeping. Drawings of me watching TV. And on the last page, there was a drawing of me standing in the bedroom, looking up at the open crawlspace door. Underneath it, he had written. He finally looked up. I moved out the next day. I broke my lease. I didn't care about the deposit. I moved back in with my parents for 3 months. I live in a high-rise now, on the 20th floor. Concrete walls. No crawl spaces. No attics. But I still check the milk. Every single time I open the fridge, I check the level. And before I go to sleep, I take a piece of Scotch tape and put it on the door handle. Because the police told me something that haunts me. When they arrested him, he didn't fight. He just laughed. And as they were putting him in the car, he looked at Mr. Henderson and said, "Tell the next one I like peanut butter better than jelly." There are spaces in your house that you don't own. The space behind the drywall. The space in the attic eaves. The space under the floorboards. We think our walls are solid, but they're hollow. And sometimes, they aren't empty. Story 2. The green light. Technology is supposed to make us feel safe. That's what the salesman told me when I bought this Sentinel 360 indoor security camera. It was a small, sleek white ball that sat on my bookshelf. It had 4K resolution, night vision, two-way audio, and a motion sensor that sent alerts to my phone. I bought it because I live alone. My apartment is on the first floor, and the window faces a busy alleyway. I wanted peace of mind. I wanted to be able to check on my apartment when I was at work. For the first week, it was great. I would open the app at lunch and watch my cat, Luna, sleeping on the couch. It made me feel connected. It made me feel secure. But then, the glitches started. It began on a Tuesday night. I was sitting on my couch watching a movie. The room was dark, lit only by the TV. I happened to glance over at the bookshelf. The Sentinel 360 had a small LED status light. Blue meant it was in standby mode. Green meant someone was watching the live feed. The light was green. I frowned. I pulled out my phone. The app was closed. I wasn't watching the feed. Weird, I whispered. I opened the app and went to the settings. Current viewers, 1. My stomach dropped. I changed my password immediately. I made it something complicated, a string of 20 random letters and numbers. I rebooted the camera. The light turned blue. Just a glitch, I told myself. Or maybe the app was running in the background. 2 days later, it happened again. I was getting out of the shower. I wrapped a towel around myself and walked into the bedroom to get dressed. The camera was on the dresser, facing the bed. I looked at it. The green light was on. I froze, clutching the towel to my chest. The lens of the camera swiveled. It moved slowly, mechanically, following me as I walked across the room. I didn't think. I grabbed a t-shirt and threw it over the camera. I called customer support. The guy on the phone sounded bored. "It's probably a firmware update, ma'am," he said. "The camera recalibrates its motion tracking sometimes. It looks like it's following you, but it's just testing the motors." And the green light. Status indicator malfunction. Very common. If you're worried, just unplug it when you're home. So I did. That became my routine. As soon as I walked in the door, I unplugged the camera. I only plugged it in when I left for work. But the feeling didn't go away. You know when you walk into a room and the air feels heavy? Like someone was just there? I started finding things moved. Tiny things. My toothbrush was on the left side of the sink, not the right. The toilet seat was up. I'm a girl, I never leave it up. The cushions on the couch were slightly dented, like someone had been sitting there. I blamed Luna. Bad cat, I'd say, fixing the pillows. Luna would just stare at me, her tail twitching nervously. She stopped sleeping on the couch. She started hiding under my bed. Animals know. They always know. Then came the Friday of the incident. I had a long day at work. I stayed late to finish a project and didn't get home until 9 p.m. I was exhausted. I unlocked my front door, dropped my keys, and went straight to the kitchen to pour a glass of wine. I walked into the living room and stopped. The camera was plugged in. I stared at the outlet. The black cord was snaking up the wall, plugged firmly into the socket. I knew with 100% certainty that I had unplugged it that morning. I remembered pulling the cord. I remembered dropping it on the floor. I looked up at the bookshelf. The camera was there. The green light was glowing, and it was pointing right at me. "Hello," I said, my voice shaking. Click. The speaker on the camera crackled. It was the two-way audio. Someone was activating the microphone from the other end. Heavy breathing filled the room. It sounded wet and raspy. SCCHHHHH. SCCHHHHH. "Who is this?" I yelled. "I'm calling the police." A voice came through the tiny speaker. It was distorted, digital, but deep. "Turn around," the voice whispered. I spun around. The room was empty. The kitchen was empty. "Very pretty," the voice whispered. "Now look under the couch." I backed away. "No. Look under the couch," the voice screamed. It was so loud the speaker popped. I turned and ran. I didn't look under the couch. I didn't grab my purse. I sprinted out the front door and ran to my neighbor's apartment. I pounded on his door until he opened it. "Call the cops," I screamed. "Someone is in my apartment." The police arrived in under 3 minutes. They swept the place, guns drawn. They checked the closets, the bathroom, the shower. "Clear," one officer yelled. They came out to the hallway where I was shivering. "Ma'am, the apartment is empty," the officer said. "We checked everywhere. The windows are locked. The back door is deadbolt." "But the camera," I stammered. He spoke to me through the camera. He told me to look under the couch. The officer frowned. "Let's take a look." We went back inside. The officer knelt down by the couch. He shone his flashlight underneath. He stiffened. "Jesus." He reached under and pulled out a sleeping bag. It was rolled up tight. Next to it was a knife. A long, serrated hunting knife. "Someone was waiting down there," the officer said grimly. "They must have slipped out the fire escape when you ran." I looked at the camera on the bookshelf. The officer unplugged it and bagged it as evidence. "We'll need to check the SD card," he said. "If it was recording, we might get a face." 2 days later, the detective called me. "Sarah," he said, "we looked at the footage." "Did you see him?" I asked. "Did you see him break in?" "No," the detective said. "That's the problem. There is no footage of a break-in. The camera only recorded when it was plugged in, right?" "Right. I only plugged it in when I left." "Well," the detective paused. "The logs show that for the last 2 weeks, the camera was being unplugged at 8 a.m. and plugged back in at 8:05 a.m. I felt cold. "What?" "You would unplug it," he explained. "And as soon as you walked out the door, he would come out from hiding and plug it back in." "Why?" I whispered. "Why would he do that?" "Because he wanted to watch you," the detective said. "But not while you were home. He wanted to watch you while you were at work. He wanted to learn your schedule. He used the motion tracking to watch the street from your bookshelf, so he knew exactly when you were coming back. And then, right before you walked in the door, he would unplug it again. He would hide, and he would wait. But that night, you came home late," the detective said. "You broke the routine. He didn't expect you at 9 p.m. He was probably making himself comfortable, maybe watching TV. When he heard your key in the lock, he panicked. He hid under the couch. But he forgot to unplug the camera. I dropped the phone. I thought about the dented cushions. I thought about the toilet seat. He hadn't been hacking my camera from China or Russia. He hadn't been a digital ghost. He had been sitting on my couch. He had been eating my food. And every morning, when I left for work, thinking I was turning on my security system, I was actually turning on his entertainment system. I moved out. I don't use smart cameras anymore. I bought a dog, a big German Shepherd. But sometimes, when I'm at a friend's house and I see one of those little white balls sitting on a shelf, watching the room with its unblinking glass eye, I have to leave. Because I know that the scariest part isn't who is watching from the outside. The scariest part is who is watching from the inside, waiting for the green light to turn off so they can come out and play. Story 3. The Visitor in Site 9. I have been camping my whole life. My dad was a scoutmaster, so I grew up in the woods. I know how to tie knots, I know how to start a fire in the rain, and I know how to spot a bear from a mile away. I'm not easily scared. But what happened to me last October in the Superior National Forest, that wasn't about survival skills. That was about predator and prey. I decided to take a solo trip before the winter snow set in. I drove 6 hours north of Duluth, deep into the Arrowhead region of Minnesota. I wasn't going to a campground with showers and RV hookups. I was doing dispersed camping. That means you park your truck on a logging road, hike a few miles into the bush, and pitch your tent wherever you want. No fees, no neighbors, no rules. I found a spot near a small, unnamed lake. It was perfect. Flat ground for the tent, plenty of dry wood for a fire, and a view of the water that looked like a painting. I set up my camp. A bright orange one-person tent, a small folding chair, and a fire ring made of stones. The first day was paradise. I fished, I read, I drank whiskey by the fire. The silence was absolute. No airplanes, no traffic. Just the wind in the pine trees and the occasional splash of a fish. But as the sun went down, the mood changed. The Superior National Forest is dense. The trees are packed so tight that sunlight barely hits the ground. When it gets dark, it gets pitch dark. You can't see your hand in front of your face without a flashlight. I was sitting by the fire around 10 p.m. when I heard it. Snap! A twig breaking. It came from the woods behind me, about 50 yards out. I froze, my beer halfway to my mouth. I listened. Shuffle, shuffle, snap. It was footsteps. 2 feet. Walking slowly. Hello. I called out. My voice sounded loud and unnatural in the quiet woods. Is someone there? The footsteps stopped instantly. I waited. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Nothing. Just a deer. I muttered to myself. Deer sound surprisingly like people when they walk. They step, pause, step. I threw a few more logs on the fire to build up the light. Then I crawled into my tent. I zipped the door shut, zip, and slid into my sleeping bag. I lay there for a long time, listening. The wind picked up, rustling the dry leaves. I eventually drifted off. I woke up at 3 a.m. I didn't know why at first. My bladder was full, so I figured that was it. I lay in the dark, debating whether it was worth getting out into the cold to pee. Then I heard breathing. It wasn't mine. It was coming from right outside the tent. It was slow, rhythmic, and heavy. Huh. It sounded like large lungs. My first thought was bear. A black bear sniffing the tent fabric. I slowly reached for the bear spray canister I kept in the mesh pocket by my head. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I tried to be silent, but the nylon of my sleeping bag rustled. Swish. The breathing stopped. Then, a finger pressed against the side of the tent. I watched in horror as the orange fabric indented. A single finger poking the wall of my tent, right by my face. It traced a slow line down the fabric. Scritch. A bear doesn't have fingers. A bear doesn't trace shapes. Who's there? I shouted, grabbing my hunting knife. I have a gun. I didn't have a gun, but they didn't know that. Silence. Then, a soft, low chuckle. Ha, ha, ha. It was a man's voice. It was dry and raspy, like he had swallowed sand. Go away, I yelled. I'm calling the Rangers. The finger pulled away from the fabric. I heard footsteps backing away slowly. Crunch, crunch, crunch. They faded into the darkness. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat up with my knife, waiting for the sun. When dawn finally broke, I unzipped the tent and burst out, looking everywhere. The campsite was empty. The woods were quiet. I walked around the perimeter of the tent. The ground was covered in pine needles, which don't hold tracks well. But in a patch of mud near the fire ring, I found it. A boot print. It was huge, size 13 at least, and it had a weird tread pattern, zigzags. But the scary part was the direction. The tracks didn't come from the woods. They came from the lake. Someone had walked out of the freezing water, walked up the bank, and stood by my tent. I should have left right then. Every instinct I had screamed leave. But I'm stubborn. I told myself it was probably just a local teenager messing with tourists. I wasn't going to let some jerk ruin my trip. I spent the day hiking, but I stayed close to camp. I kept looking over my shoulder. I felt eyes on me. You know that feeling when the hair on the back of your neck stands up? I had that all day. I decided to set a trap, just for my peace of mind. Before I went to get firewood, I took a small piece of clear fishing line. I tied it across the zipper of my tent door, low down where you wouldn't see it. If someone opened the tent while I was gone, the line would snap. I walked into the woods to gather logs. I was gone for maybe 20 minutes. When I came back, the campsite looked normal. The tent was still zipped. I knelt down to check the fishing line. It was intact. I let out a huge breath of relief. See, I told myself, you're being paranoid. Nobody is here. I cooked dinner, steak and potatoes, and ate quickly. I put the fire out early, around 9 p.m., and got into the tent. I wanted to be hidden in the dark, not sitting by a spotlight fire. I fell asleep holding my knife. I was dreaming about drowning when the sound woke me up. Zzzt. The sound of a zipper. My eyes snapped open. It was pitch black inside the tent. Zzzt. Someone was unzipping the rainfly, the outer layer of the tent. I lay frozen. If I moved, they would know I was awake. The rainfly flap was pulled back. Now, only the inner mesh door separated me from the outside. I could feel the cold air rushing in. Then, a beam of light hit me. A flashlight. Someone was shining a flashlight through the mesh, directly into my face. I squinted, blinded by the beam. I couldn't see who was holding it. I could only see the silhouette of a man crouched in the vestibule of my tent. "Are you awake, Mike?" the voice whispered. He knew my name. I hadn't told anyone my name. "How do you know my name?" I stammered, gripping the knife so hard my knuckles turned white. "It's on your cooler," the man whispered. "Property of Mike." He shifted his weight. The flashlight beam moved down to my chest. "You have a nice setup here, Mike. Very cozy. What do you want?" I asked. "Take my wallet. Take the truck keys. Just go." The man laughed again. That dry, sandy chuckle. "I don't want your truck," he said. "I live here. You're the one in my bedroom." He reached out a hand and pressed it against the mesh door. His fingers were filthy, the nails black and broken. He began to fiddle with the zipper of the inner door. Jingle, jingle. The zipper tab rattled. "Don't do it," I warned him. "I swear to God, I'll stab you." "Through the mesh?" he asked. "That would ruin your expensive tent, Mike." He pulled the zipper down an inch. Zzzt. I didn't wait. I screamed, a primal, terrified roar, and I lunged at the door. I stabbed the knife through the mesh, slashing downward. The flashlight dropped. The man fell backward with a grunt. I didn't stop. I ripped the zipper open and scrambled out of the tent, barefoot, into the freezing night. The man was scrambling to his feet near the fire pit. He was huge, tall and gaunt, wearing tattered rags that looked like old military fatigues. He was bleeding from a cut on his arm where I had slashed him. He looked at me, and his eyes, they were completely wild. Pupils dilated so wide his eyes looked black. He smiled. His teeth were filed to points. "Run, rabbit," he whispered. I ran. I ran barefoot through the forest. I stepped on pine cones, rocks, thorns. I didn't feel any of it. I ran toward where I parked the truck, a mile away. I could hear him behind me. He wasn't running. He was loping. He was moving through the brush like an animal, crashing through branches. "I'm coming, Mike," he hooted. "I'm coming for dinner." I reached the logging road. The gravel tore up my feet, but I sprinted harder. I saw the reflection of my truck's taillights ahead. I fumbled for my keys. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped them in the dirt. Crash. He burst out of the tree line 20 feet behind me. He had my flashlight. The beam swung wildly. Found you. I dropped to my knees, clawing in the dirt for the keys. My fingers brushed the metal. I grabbed them, jammed the key into the door, and threw myself inside. I locked the door just as he slammed against the glass. He pressed his face against the driver's side window. He licked the glass, leaving a long smear of saliva. He banged on the window with his fist. Thump, thump. I jammed the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. I threw it in reverse and floored it. The truck spun out, kicking up gravel. The man held onto the door handle for a second, running alongside the truck, laughing that horrible laugh, before he let go. I drove 60 miles an hour down that logging road. I didn't stop until I hit the paved highway. I drove straight to the sheriff's station in Grand Marais. I sat in the lobby, wrapped in a blanket, while the deputies went out to check. My feet were shredded, bleeding all over the linoleum floor. They came back 4 hours later. They had my gear. They had my tent, my cooler, my fishing pole. Did you find him? I asked. The sheriff shook his head. No sign of him, but we found where he was staying. Staying? About 50 yards from your campsite. Hidden in a thicket of brush, we found a hole. A hole. A dugout, the sheriff explained. Like a foxhole, covered with branches and tarp. He's been living there a long time, Mike. Years, maybe. He paused, looking uncomfortable. And we found your fishing line trap. The one on the tent zipper? I asked. It was intact. I checked it. Yeah, the sheriff said. The line on the outside zipper was intact. But Mike, we found another piece of fishing line. Where? On the inside zipper. I felt the blood drain from my face. He wasn't breaking into your tent, Mike, the sheriff said softly. He was already inside. When you went to get firewood, he slipped in. He hid under your cot, or behind your gear bag. He tied the line to the outside to make you think it was safe. I thought about the first night. The finger poking the tent. I thought about the second night. The zipper sound. He wasn't trying to get in. He was trying to get out. I had slept in that small, one-person tent. I had zipped the door shut. I had lain there in the dark, listening to the wind. And the whole time, curled up in the darkness just inches from my feet, he was there, watching me sleep, waiting for me to wake up so he could introduce himself. I don't camp anymore. I don't go into the woods. I sold my truck. I live in the suburbs now. I have an alarm system. I have motion lights. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed and the house settles, I hear a sound. A faint, metallic rasping. Zzzt. And I pull the covers up over my head, and I pray that this time, the lock on the front door is stronger than a zipper. So which one was worse? The crawl space, the camera, or the tent? Tell me your vote in the comments right now. If you survived this video, hit the like button and subscribe for more. Until next time, check your locks.